So in our selection tools, we have the rectangular marquee, which will allow us to select a rectangle or square, an elliptical marquee, which will allow us to select an oval or a circle, and then a single row or single column marquee. So let's just look at that quickly. If I were to make a selection using the elliptical marquee, it would give me a circular selection. I notice it's more like an oval. If I wanted to get it exactly like a circle, I could hold down the shift key, right? And that would constrain the proportions to get me an equal height, equal width on my marquee. All right. So I'm just going to draw a quick selection. And once we create a selection, what you notice we have is the matching ants. We call it the matching ants because that's what they look like. If you notice, it looks like ants walking in a line, right? And that indicates where our selection is. Now, why would you want to make a selection? Can anybody tell me what's the purpose of making a selection?
So you can highlight a specific thing.
So you can highlight something, yes. What else? So one of the main reasons for making a selection is so that you can isolate an object onto a layer by itself. All right. So that way you can essentially remove the background of an object and get it into a layer by itself, or in this case, make a copy. Everybody see that?
Yes.
Now as we can see, that basically gave us an overall selection, which doesn't quite isolate the object exactly the way we like it. So we're going to go a little bit deeper into our selection tools. Drop that layer. All right. So probably the most critical tool for you guys to learn today is the group of tools called our Lasso tools. All right, and that's made up of 3 tools. We have the regular lasso, all right, the polygonal lasso, and the magnetic lasso tool. Anybody has any experience using any of these tools? All right, so our lasso tool is basically a freehand selection tool. Basically, it will allow us to click and drag to make a selection following the movements of our hand, right? And well, essentially that's it. We have a freehand selection. You can see it's not as precise as we'd like it to be, but we can always come back and modify it, right? So the lasso tool will be for those of you that have a pretty straight hand, or for those of you that have additional drawing tools like a drawing tablet, where you can actually get a precise selection. All right, but it's pretty simple. You select the lasso tool, you click and drag to make a selection. When you release, it's going to close your selection. You're going to see the matching hands, and then your selection is made. All right. Once you have the selection made, an easy way to get your object into a layer by itself is with your selection tool still selected or still highlighted. You can right click on the object, all right? And I like to go layer via copy. Layer via copy will give you a duplicate of whatever area that was selected, all right? So you can work with by itself or isolated on a layer by itself. Everybody see that?
Yes, sir.
All right. My favorite one of the lasso tools, just drop that there. And the one that would probably get you some of the cleanest selections, but with the most manual labor, is the Polygonal Lasso tool, right? Now, the Polygonal Lasso tool is, as the name implies, used to select polygons, right? But you can use it to select almost any shape. So looking at this image of the car that I have here, we're going to try to isolate that car or the object using our Polygonal Lasso tool. And the way that you use it is simple. When I ensure that you can see the bulk of the object, you can see the detail, right? And you make a first click right on the edge of your document, right? Or the edge of your object that you want to select. So my first click is going to be right here. If you want to get it precisely, because you might not be sure where it's clicking, it at the tip of the arrow or at the tip of the icon itself, you can always press the caps lock, right? And that will give you the crosshair, showing you exactly where you are going to put down your first point, all right? So I'm going to click on the edge of the car here, right? And I have my first point. Notice when I click to create the first point, that point is basically anchored on my document. And as I move my cursor around, it gives me a straight line from my cursor to the last point that I had, right? And all I want to do right now is move along the object or along the edges of the object. And the selection tool will actually follow me, giving me a straight line in between my last point and my current location with my selection tool, my Polygonal Lasso tool. Now I can come a little closer into my design so I can see some of the detail. Sorry. One of the things that can occur when you're making a selection in the Polygonal Lasso tool is you can inadvertently double click or click in the same area twice and close your selection. Unfortunately, in a situation like that, we have to start again. So I'm going to press Ctrl D or deselect. It's the same as going to the select menu and deselect to remove the selection. And I'm going to attempt to start it over again. So click, one click, move to the next straight line point, another click. And I'm going to use my shortcut keys to zoom a little closer in so I can get a little more detail on the edge. And the shortcut for that is Control and Space. Essentially, we're using the zoom tool, all right? And we're clicking, click, and moving in the next straight line area, click, click. I'm going to do it a bit quickly in the interest of time, all right? Now, in the areas where it's not really a straight line, but it's rounded, what that means is you won't be able to make your next point that far away from your last point. So you're going to essentially be making your points closer together to try to get all of those curves. All right. So shorter distance between the points for the curved edges. We can press this space bar while we're making a selection to actually grab our document and move it around so we can see different parts, right, of the document. And essentially, we're just going to be going around, taking our time trying to get as close as possible to the edge of the design or the object, actually, in that case, to make a selection. Going around the front. Now, at this point here, notice we have the main object, but we also have the shadows. For example, I'm going to include my shadow in the selection. So rather than go across the bumper, I'm going to just include the shadow because it's very defined. So it just makes one easier selection, right? At this point. Running for a little bit quicker, so don't mind if I leave out some critical detail or some not so critical detail rather. Right, and essentially we're just going around. All right, at this point I'm gonna cut across to the back of the car and just attempt to close the selection. So bad job on the spoiler, but just go ahead. Now to finish your selection, when you go all the way around the object, you essentially come back to your starting point, right? And when you put your cursor over your starting point, right, your very first point, notice it changes to the Polygonal Lasso with a little circle on the right side of it. Everybody can see that? That indicates that you're going to close your selection and actually make a selection, all right? So click. The next thing that happens is we should see the marching ants. There is it, right? So we have our marching ants showing our selection being made. It's mostly done here, and then we sort of got lazy on that end, right? But I'll show you how we can fix that. Everybody get that?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
enough, right? Okay. Now, one of the things that you can do is you can actually modify your selection. So when you've created a selection, right, that's not the end of it. You can actually tweak it to get it perfect or as perfect as you need it to be. If you notice, my selection was done a bit lazily here, and I actually cut out a large part of the shadow on the left side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to modify my selection to include that part of the shadow, right? So if we come up to our options bar here, with any selection tool selected, notice we have a few options here. The first one is a square by itself, and that will allow us to make a new selection. With that selected, every time we start making a selection, it's going to deselect everything on the screen and create a new selection, all right? Second option will allow us to add to selection, meaning if we have a selection made already, we can select that second option and we can make another selection, which will then be added to the first one. So notice we have the car selected and we have a second selection here, all right? The third tool, anybody can guess what this third tool does? Subtract from selection.
What you selected.
Right. So if you have an area that is currently selected, such as that triangle at the top, but you do not want it selected, you could select this third option and subtract from selection. So you would make a selection that would then remove from your current selection everywhere that was currently selected. Yeah? Everybody sees that? And then we could use the last one, which is Intersect Selection, to give us an intersection between two selections. So let's say we have, so we want to select an intersection. Let me just do it quickly. So we're going to select part of the car that's already selected and part of the road that's not. What you notice, what we have left is the intersection between those two previous selections. Everybody sees that? I'm going to step back to get back to my previous selection, right? So edit, and we can undo Polygonal Lasso, Control Z, right? And notice we have our previous selection again. So let's modify that now to include the rest of the shadow, right? Anybody can tell me what option I want to have selected here? No? All right. So we're going to go with add to selection, right? Because as we can see, the car is mostly selected. We just have this little piece here that we need to add to our selection. And then we're going to start our selection on the inside. Really, anywhere is okay. And then we're going to just continue our selection, adding areas that we wanted to include. All right, so again, selecting is something that can take up quite a bit of time. There are easier ways to get your selection done, but for today, I want us to focus on getting the hang of the lasso tools, all right? So, doing it quickly again in the interest of time. If you want to get a better selection, you simply just need to spend more time on your selecting, right? And select precisely on the edge. For today, we're making a rough selection. Very, very rough selection. All right, adding pieces of the car that were left out. All right, and then we're gonna come back to our starting point. Our starting point is right here. Put our mouse pointer over the starting point of the selection, and it will give us the option to close the selection. Right, and now we have the entire object and its shadow selected. Everybody can see the matching ants running around our selection. Yes. All right. How do we now, since we have this vehicle selected, how do we isolate it onto a layer by itself? Anybody can remember?
You have to right click on the select on what is on your selection.
You would right click on the selection. Yeah. And
then you go in layer via copy.
Right. Layer via copy would create a copy of the pixels that are currently selected. layer via cut would essentially cut them out from the original object. So because we don't want to destroy the original layer, we're going to go with layer via copy. All right. And now if we remove the background layer, we have the object isolated by itself. Everybody get that? I'm seeing a chat here. I some even from this class starts at 6. I put you in the class early for students who haven't recorded. I'm very lost on what's going on. Manuel, are you here?
Yes, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt what you were saying, so I just sent a text in.
Okay, you're lost on what's going on. What's going on is we're looking at selection tools within Photoshop.
Okay, so is there a way I can get, because I see you're recording, so I can get the recording after?
Sure, we literally just started. You barely missed anything. We just looked at essentially the marquee tools and the Polygonal Lasso, but yes, I will make the recording available for you.
Okay, sorry, sir, because I see, you cut out the whole thing very rapidly, so I thought I missed out a lot.
No, we were just using the Polygonal Lasso. All right. Any questions on how we would use the Polygonal Lasso to make a selection? Anybody didn't quite get that? Manuel, you didn't quite get it, did you?
No, not really. I came in like you were just finishing up the shape of the car.
Okay. So to go over it briefly in 2 sentences, Polygonal Lasso tool, all right? Well, let's start from the Lasso tool. So the Lasso tool is a freehand selection tool. It will basically allow you to click and drag and make a selection freehand, all right? The Polygonal Lasso tool will allow you to essentially make a series of points connecting the different segments of your selection. So you click to make a first point, and then you essentially just go around the object, right? As close as you can to the edge, right? Or right on the edge, essentially making a selection. I'm going to go through that one doubly fast for you, right? To close your selection, you want to essentially just get back to your starting point. You put your cursor over your starting point and you click, and that will close your selection. You can tell your selection is closed because of the matching ants showing you what is selected. But that?
Yes, sir, sorry.
All right, cool. Any questions on the Polygonal Lasso tool? All right. The last lasso tool is the magnetic lasso tool, right? And a lot of people tend to prefer it because it works in a fairly automatic manner, right? So what you do with the magnetic lasso tool is you begin the same way by making a point along the edge of your object, right? But the magnetic lasso tool intelligently looks at the design and tries to figure out where the edges lie based on the color differences in the layout, right? And it automatically makes the points for you. So whereas with the Polygonal Lasso, you have to manually click to create each point. All you need to do is move around the edge of the object with the magnetic lasso tool, and it will automatically create the points for you where it thinks that the points should go. Now, a note here, Photoshop might be very intelligent, but it's not more intelligent than you. So 99% of the times, you're still going to have to guide it, right? You're going to have to undo points that were placed badly or put manual points. So you can see here, for instance, I have a big curve where it's not intended to be, right? I could press delete using the lasso tool to delete a single point and to go backwards, right? And if I want to delete multiple points, I just press delete multiple times and I can go all the way back to the beginning of my design, pressing delete essentially, right? If you notice, any big waves of your mouse will essentially cause your magnetic lasso to go haywire, right? But you can quickly get it back by pressing the delete key a few times. right? You can also put a manual point. So if it's having difficulty putting a point exactly where a point needs to go, you can manually click to put a point in that location, and then Photoshop should automatically adjust and recognize what you're trying to do. All right. So essentially, we just want to move around the edge of the design. I really should be getting it a bit closer to get the detail. And never mind the bad selection around the edge of the shadow. We're going in the interest of time again. Let's get a little closer to the wheel here. And you may have to put down a manual point wherever the color changes drastically. So where it changes from the red of the car to the black of your spoiler, for instance, you may have to put a manual click so that Photoshop knows that you now want to move to the area that looks like that color. All right. Now you can see here at the back where the spoiler is almost the same color with the background. The magnetic lasso is actually giving us a little bit of difficulty. So I'm going to click a few times just to help it along, because it's trying to align to the inside of the spoiler, not on the edge as we would like it. So, all right. Once we get back to the red, it should make it easier to just continue around. And once we get to our starting point, notice our cursor changes. Right, we now have the magnetic lasso with a little circle indicating that it's going to close that selection. So we make a click at this point, click, and then our matching hand should appear, indicating our selection is made. All right. Everybody see that?
Yes, sir.
All right. Any questions using the lasso tools? No, we all good?
No, no questions.
No questions. All right. Okay. Since I went through pretty quickly, let me give you the first part of your homework for me. All right. I want you guys to select two objects, any two objects. It can be a car like this one, a flower, a person, right? Any object. And I want you to isolate it onto a layer by itself using your lasso tools. Whatever lasso tool you decide to use, right, is up to you. I would highly recommend the Polygonal Lasso. That's my favorite option, but you can feel free to use all of them, see which one works best for you. All right. So to recap again, the lasso tool is a freehand selection tool, right? You essentially click and drag to make a selection, right? You have the Polygonal Lasso, which is a very manual tool, which is essentially allow you to make a selection, putting points in between straight line segments of your object, right? And we have the magnetic lasso, which will essentially stick to the edges of color, right? And automatically help you make your selection. Everybody good with that?
Yes, sir.
All right.
So how to zoom into the picture again?
How do you zoom in while you're making a selection, you're asking, right? So to zoom in, you would use your zoom tool, which is the very last tool at the bottom of your toolbox, right? You would select it and you have the option to zoom in or zoom out. If you're making a selection, you will not be able to switch tools, because if you switch your tool in the middle of a selection, you're going to close your selection. So that means you're going to have to adjust the zoom using your shortcut keys. So the shortcuts for zooming in are Control and Space. So if you press the Control and the Space key and click, it will allow you to zoom in, right? If you add Alt to that, so Control, Alt, and Space, it will allow you to zoom out. Everybody get that? If you have the number keys on your keyboard, it should also work if you press plus or minus. So
Wait, what did you say? What did you say was the homework again?
The homework is to select two objects, any object of your choice, but I want you to use the lasso tools. I would recommend the Polygonal Lasso. Right, so again, notice we have this object or the cast selected. To isolate it, we right click with our selection tool still highlighted and layer via copy. What that does is gets us a new layer now onto our document, right? We remove the original layer. We see the layer that we selected and isolated by default. Everybody get that?
Yes.
Yes. Any questions? No? Manuel, any questions so far?
No, sir. Yeah, we're good so far.
No, sir, it was fairly easy.
All right, awesome. Let's switch to, let's look at this for a minute. So if I go back to my selection here, right? Let me get rid of that. And if I zoom in real close, I'm not sure if you guys can see it, but there's actually a space in the spoiler right here. Can you guys make that out?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
All right. If I isolate this object, right, and I remove the background, notice there's no space in here, right? How can I remove that space now from the object? Can anybody tell me?
I'm assuming using the same Polygonal Lasso.
And then subtract it. There is the subtract function.
Well, if we still were editing our selection, meaning we had the matching ants visible, right? Then we could use the subtract from selection. So yeah, let's do that. We could go subtract and we can actually modify our selection right now by subtracting that piece from it. So I'm just gonna select the inside here and subtract that from our selection. Close. Right. And if I go right click, layer via copy, and let's make the background layer invisible. Notice now we have the space in between the spoiler. Everybody got that?
Yes, sir.
All right.
So you can do that one last time. That thing you just did, you can just do one last time.
Okay, so I'm gonna step back, Control Z, Z, Z. So again, let me do it to make it more apparent. So let's say we have this selection made, right? But we want to select everything, but not to include the front headlight. Let's say we do not want to include the front headlight in our selection, right? We can switch to subtract from selection, right? And we make an additional selection now, selecting the area that we want to remove from our current selection or subtract from our selection, which in that case is headlight. Simply go around. Enter. And to close it, we essentially come back to our starting point, right? Put the mouse over, you see it changes to the Polygonal Lasso with the little circle. Click, that should close. And notice the matching ants now goes around the vehicle, but it also goes around the headlight, indicating that this headlight is out of the selection. Let's isolate that object. So right click, layer by a copy. And this is what it looks like right now. So the headlight that was removed from the selection is not in the copied pixels.
Okay, so I understand.
Everybody get that? All right, guys. So we have 2 minutes left on our first session. Any questions for me at this point? No questions? Everybody good with the Polygonal, well, with the lasso tools? The entire selection of
sir.
lasso tools, yes? All right. 1 second, let me just take a screenshot of those people who are here right now. All right. And then we're gonna come back in 5 minutes. All right. All right, guys. So we're gonna take a break right now. Come back in 5 minutes, and then we're gonna look at a few additional tools. You guys may like the other tools a bit more. All right. But when we come back in, we'll discuss them. All right. So in the 5 minutes you have, feel free to try out the Polygonal Lasso tools and any of the other tools, right? And ask me any questions that you have when we get back in. All right, guys. So see you in 5.
Yes, sir.
Okay.